The Huawei P60 Pro is about to hit international shelves. I have the global variant here with me today, and Huawei has once again blown me away with their latest flagship. Just like its slightly older brother, the Mate 50 Pro, the Huawei P60 Pro adopts a variable aperture main camera, seriously strong Kunlun glass, and has a proper way of using Google Apps. The ability to use Google Apps is a huge deal for Huawei, and I'll be touching on this later in the video. I'll also be getting to some in-depth camera testing, and the results are phenomenal, so make sure you stick around for that too. In addition to the phone itself, you'll find a silicon case in the box, as well as a 6-amp charging cable and an 88-watt charging block, which has a USB Type-A and Type-C port. This is TechNick, and this is my full review of Huawei's most prestige flagship yet, the Huawei P60 Pro. As mentioned earlier, the device is about to hit shelves in the global market, which includes my home country South Africa, where it will be retailing for 25,999 Rand. The Huawei P60 Pro's design has changed quite a bit since its predecessor, which launched almost 2 years ago, and it is vastly different from its counterpart, which recently released, that being the Huawei Mate 50 Pro, and I must say it looks spectacular. Unlike recent flagships, which have been adopting a massive circular camera module on their backs, the P60 Pro has a more elegant camera module, which is tucked in the top corner and has a massive emphasis on its main camera, which sits in the middle of the trio. The design itself is stunning and comes in 4 different color options. You can pick it up in a smooth matte violet, a rough matte black, a smooth glossy green, or the color that I have, which is a smooth matte light finish white known as Rococo Pearl. Rococo Pearl is supposedly a limited edition which adopts a unique pearl texture design that shimmers in light with an orange gold hue. This is the world's first device to create a design from actual pearl powder, and through this process each unit with this design cannot be replicated, and therefore each Rococo Pearl version is completely unique. So if you decide to pick one up, you'll be holding the only phone like that in the world. The device comes in at 200 grams in weight and is 8.3 millimeters thick. The frames are made from aluminum. It has an IP68 dust and water resistant certification, which can be submerged into water as deep as 2 meters for 30 minutes. Its back panel is made from glass, and its screen is protected by Huawei's own made Kunlun glass, which is apparently 10 times more drop resistant than regular glass. The display has also seen quite an upgrade. It's still a quad curved OLED panel, but is now less curved and slightly larger than its predecessor at 6.67 inches, and finally packs in LTPO tech for a 1 to 120 Hz refresh rate alongside a 300 Hz touch sampling rate and an impressive 1440 Hz PWM dimming. It has a resolution which sits somewhere between QHD and Full HD that packs in 444 pixels per inch, and since it's a 10-bit panel, it can display over 1 billion colors and supports HDR10, HDR10 Plus, and Widevine L1. Not to mention it gets even brighter than the Mate 50 Pro, which can reach a peak brightness of 1750 nits. When it comes to software, the P60 Pro utilizes EMUI 13.1 in the global market, which is skinned over Android 12. We do have HMS Core, which is Huawei Mobile Services instead of Google Mobile Services Framework, but you can get Google Apps and you can sign into your accounts without many issues. You can't sign in within settings, but let me show you a bit of a workaround, which is actually fairly simple with something called Gbox. If you open Google, it indicates Play Services is not supported, but if you open up Google through Gbox, then it works with no problems. You can even add the Gbox Google app to your home screen along with other apps too. It has a tiny preview screen of Gbox before it goes in, but the good news is that it works and you can sign in as well. You can do the same with YouTube as well as any other Google apps. It gets faster the more you use it, and there's no funny badge at the bottom of the icon, which we've seen in the recent past. That said, the app gallery for Huawei has improved a ton. You can search for any app on the web within it to find apps from Gbox, and it goes even further to search for apps within something called Patel Search, which finds APKs online in which you can then download and install the app directly from a third-party app gallery such as APK Pure. Otherwise, the app gallery has all other non-Google apps you use on the daily, and there is even a separate game app where you can download games as well as monitor the games you already play. Huawei even has its own voice assistant now called Celia, and she can even open up Google apps, not to mention the actual software of the phone is a breeze to use and is filled with customization options. You can adjust folder sizes to your liking, tap directly on an icon within a large folder to open it, and of course you can add widgets to your home screen, but Huawei one-ups the competition again here by allowing you to stack widgets on top of each other, which you can then swipe up and down to change between. Multitasking is another feature Huawei takes pride in, which allows you to swipe up from the bottom of an opened app, drag it to the top left corner and enter split screen. You can also do the same gesture but swipe to the top right corner to create a floating window. And to keep things going is a larger 4815 mAh battery, which is slightly larger than the Mate 50 Pro's battery and significantly larger than its predecessor, the P50 Pro's battery size. It also has a 1% low power mode, which automatically kicks in at 1% for an extra 3 hours of standby time. Huawei have also increased wide charging speeds from 66 to 88 watts, and if you long touch the center of your screen when you plug your phone in, you enable something called turbocharge, which can get your phone to 50% in just 10 minutes. That said, wireless charging is identical to its predecessor at 50 watt speeds, but reverse wireless charging has increased to 7.5 watts. So Huawei still suffers from a 5G ban, which means it unfortunately lacks 5G. And since there is not yet a 4G version of Qualcomm's latest chipset, the P60 Pro is stuck to last year's Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 4G CPU. It's not the latest chipset around, but it is still one of the fastest processors on the market. And when performance mode is enabled, we are treated to some heavy-hitting benchmark scores. But since it uses last year's Snapdragon chip, the P60 Pro still uses LPDDR5 RAM and UFS 3.1 storage. And even though the P60 Pro is using slightly older tech under the hood, it still performs like a champion in terms of gaming. Kickstarting things off with Real Racing 3, we were able to achieve a rock-solid 90 FPS, and while we should be getting up to 120 FPS due to its panel, there seems to be a cap at 90 FPS, which will hopefully be fixed with a future software update, but I'm not too phased since most flagships tend to cap this game at 60. We got the same 90 FPS while playing Call of Duty Mobile when set to ultra frame rate mode, which is really good to see. And even though Genshin Impact is capped at 60 FPS, it's still a seriously demanding game, and we managed to get a fairly stable 60 FPS with all graphical settings maxed out. Huawei's latest flagship also features Bluetooth 5 NFC, Wi-Fi 6 and dual SIM 4G, not to mention its SIM tray also supports a nano memory SD card for up to an extra 256 gigs of expandable storage. There's also a USB 3.1 Type-C port, an IR blaster and dual stereo speakers, which aids in a very loud gaming experience. So the Huawei P60 Pro may not have the latest chipset under the hood, but it still performs phenomenally well when it comes to gaming or running benchmarks. But the P series from Huawei is all about photography, so let's get started with the selfie camera. Unlike the Mate 50 Pro, the Huawei P60 Pro has a single hole punch notch at the top of its display and lacks a 3D sensor for facial recognition and depth mapping. However, just like the Mate 50 Pro, it houses the same selfie camera, that being an 18mm 13MP f2.4 ultra-wide sensor, which can adjust focal lengths between 18mm, 22mm and 27mm. There is also a portrait mode option, but this only works at 1x and the circles effect needs to be applied. Selfies come out crystal clear and filled with detail, and though portrait mode looks great too, it suffers from pretty bad edge detection. Unfortunately, there is no portrait video mode option available for the selfie camera on the brand new Huawei P60 Pro. But luckily for us, there is 4K 60 FPS selfie video recording, and you can switch from the wide angle to 0.8x to 1x on the fly. Let me know your thoughts of the video quality and microphone quality when recording with the selfie cam. It's fantastic to see selfie videos can be shot at 4K 60 FPS, but 30 FPS seems to be the sweet spot for night selfie videos, but in turn produces a fair amount of noise grain. Night mode is not an option for the wide and 0.8x selfie modes, but night mode is available when set to 1x and looks even better when the flash is enabled. Portrait mode looks decent with the flash too, but again suffers from poor edge detection. So selfie portrait mode on the Huawei P60 Pro may not be perfect, but I'm pretty sure this will be fixed with a future software update. That being said, selfies on the P60 Pro come out superb, not to mention that we are actually able to get 4K 60fps selfie video, which is pretty unheard of when it comes to Chinese Android flagship smartphones. But now it's time to get to the juicy part. The back sensors of the P60 Pro. The ultra-wide camera is identical to what we saw on the Mate 50 Pro, that being a 13mm 13MP f2.2 sensor with a 120-degree field of view. But the telephoto periscope camera is slightly different. It's a 90mm 48MP f2.1 ultra lighting sensor, which can zoom in optically by 3.5 times, has a minimum focusing distance of 10 centimeters, and supports OIS. The main camera also supports optical image stabilization and still features the same ultra aperture tech we saw in the Mate 50 Pro, which ranges from f1.4 to f4.0 aperture with 10 aperture stops in between. But it's once again slightly different, as it's now a 25mm 48MP 1 in 1.43 inch sized sensor. The P60 Pro is also equipped with Huawei's XD Fusion Pro texture engine to produce lifelike images, and just like the Mate 50 Pro before it too has a laser autofocusing system, as well as an XMage processing unit, which packs in 3 different XMage styles, that being bright, vivid, and original. You can use these different XMage styles across all 3 sensors, and they all look fantastic. But since original produces the most color accurate images, that's what we'll be sticking to from now on. Moving on to the variable aperture main camera, we can switch between f1.4, f2.0, f2.8, and f4.0, not to mention you can adjust between 10 different aperture stops in Pro mode. And you can see how the depth of field adjusts with each shot. It allows you to be very specific when taking a shot and provides different results when taking a shot of a person. We can also take a 1x portrait using the main camera, which reverts to f1.4 when set to portrait mode, and there is also a 2x portrait mode option when using the main cam, which also sticks to f1.4, and it looks phenomenal. But the ultra lighting periscope sensor takes arguably the best portrait shot at 3.5x optical zoom. I mean, just take a moment and look at that detail. Speaking of detail, there is also a super macro mode option when using the periscope sensor, which allows for a 10cm minimum focusing distance, and it's almost too detailed. It does a fairly decent job too when taking a snap of this plant here, but the ultra-wide super macro mode seems to come out slightly better in this situation. And despite the ultra-wide camera only being 13 megapixels, it still takes a superb shot with minimal edge distortion. The main sensor packs in quite a lot more pixels at 48 megapixels. You can shoot a native shot with it and it looks quite dreamy, but the bin down 12 megapixel shot comes out more balanced and more true to life. The periscope sensor cannot be used in high res mode, so we're stuck to 12 megapixel bin shots, but it is extremely clear at 3.5x optical zoom. Not to mention 5x hybrid zoom loses almost no detail. There is also an option for 10x hybrid zoom, which retains most of the detail, but tends to suffer from white balance issues. I was surprised how good images come out at 30x digital zoom, and though we lose a lot of detail at 50x zoom, things still come out fairly clear. 100x digital zoom is the max zoom level, and Huawei actually advertises this as a 200x zoom range when in relation to the ultra-wide magnification. You can seamlessly switch between all 3 cameras when recording continuous 4K 30fps video, from the ultra-wide to the main to the periscope, all the way up to 15x digital zoom, but the Mate 50 Pro could do this at 4K 60fps. And while we can record 4K 30fps video using the ultra-wide camera, the Mate 50 Pro could again do this at 4K 60fps, but results still come out quite great. There is once again no option for 8K video when shooting with the main sensor, but 4K 60fps comes out silky smooth and packed with detail, and we still have an option for 1080p slow motion video using the main cam at a whopping 960 frames per second, which is epic. Recording a human subject at 4K 60fps using the main camera adds a nice natural depth of field, and while there is no portrait video mode per se, there is an aperture mode which allows you to seamlessly switch between all 4 different aperture stops when recording continuous 1080p 24fps video, and it's extremely satisfying to see the switch. You can do the same at night, and it's crazy how well the main sensor handles light when dropping to wider apertures, not to mention the adjustment of background blur is quite evident. Again, you can shoot regular 4K video for a nice natural depth of field, even at night. And though the main can shoot 4K 60fps video, 30fps seems to be the sweet spot for recording at night. Using the same resolution and frame rate, but with the ultra-wide camera this time, comes out okay at night, but no doubt better than what we saw on the Mate 50 Pro. However, the ultra-wide sensor tends to struggle when taking photos at night. The main camera reverts to f1.4 at night and comes out incredibly well lit. Things are a little more dull when using the periscope at 3.5 times optical zoom, but it does a more than decent job in a dim lit scene. 5 times hybrid zoom looks just as good, but starts to lose white balance control, and white balance is all over the show at 10 times zoom, but things are still extremely detailed. I was again surprised by how bright and well balanced a shot came out at 30 times digital zoom, but again detail goes downhill at 50 times. Needless to say, this is still one fantastic shot at such a high zoom level in such a low lit situation. 100 times zoom is once again the max zoom level, and though a lot of detail is lost, you can still make out what's going on here. And while you can shoot portrait shots with the periscope sensor at night, results don't come out even half as good as they did during the day. Taking a night mode shot of me using the main comes out quite well considering all lights in the background, and this is evident when flicking between f4.0, f2.8, f2.0 and the sweet spot, that being f1.4, which is also applied when taking a 1x portrait mode shot of me at night, and it looks incredible, despite questionable edge detection. Just like all flagship camera smartphones these days, the camera performance of the Huawei P60 Pro has its pros and cons. It might trail others in terms of ultra-wide results, but its main and telephoto sensors do an insanely good job during the day and at night due to their ultra lighting capabilities. Not to mention, it is one of the few phones on the market that has the ability to physically adjust its main camera aperture by 10 different stops. And while Huawei still suffers from US sanctions, you are now able to download and install Google apps even easier than before. It's just a pity that we're still limited to 4G networks and last year's chipset. That said, the P60 Pro still performs phenomenally well across all departments and features all the right specs that you would come to expect from a flagship smartphone. And I'm very impressed to see that Huawei have finally included LTPO tech in its display this time round. Let me know your thoughts on Huawei's most intriguing device to date in the comment section down below. This is TechNick and I'll catch you in the next one.